How you going, YouTube watchers, and welcome to the channel. So in this one we're going to be jumping back in on the HQ sedan project, and we're going to get this one sealed up in epoxy primer. So as you can see, we're dealing with a bit of bare metal, bit of surface rust, and also going over pre-existing epoxy primer that I'd put on earlier stages, and also some stuff that had come back from the sandblaster. These inner guards have actually been sealed off in Resto finished poly primer. These have had all the body work and stuff done to them, so yeah, they're coming up really nice. I'm really happy with them. So this nose cone, it had a lot of little pinholes in it that needed to be welded up after it was sandblasted. So I sorted all them out, had them sitting in etch primer just for the time being. And now I've gone over the whole nose cone, prepped it all up, gotten all sort of the rough blasting profile out of it, and then sealed it off with a nice coat of epoxy primer. It's a bit of work to get these panels prepped up all nicely on the inside as well and get a nice coat of epoxy primer on them. These two doors, they didn't need a whole lot of work. I just had a little bit of pulling and shrinking to do on this back door after I'd sealed it up in epoxy primer the first time. Noticed I wasn't quite really that happy with how it fitted. And then this one, basically I just wanted to touch up a few little areas where I'd worked. So I didn't need a full epoxy prime. So these doors didn't need a full strip back. I just metal conditioned the bare metal spots that I'd exposed for some time. And then I had prepped those up with 80 grit and then sort of feathered my way back in with a little bit of 120 and then gone over the pre-existing epoxy primer with 180. So what I'm doing here is I'm just trying to seal off that bare metal and then put a fresher coat sort of over the areas that I've blended my, my freshly prepped metal into with my pre-existing epoxy. And obviously I don't want to be going 80 grit straight over the top of that epoxy and then putting more epoxy primer on it, because I could get shrink back down to those 80 grit scratches, which then will show in the later finishes. So when I'm going over the pre-existing epoxy primer, I usually finish off with a 120 or a 180 grit scratch. So now I'm just stripping off the rest of the front panels off this car, because they're the next bits that I'm going to be getting into epoxy primer. So the left and right guard and the radiator support panel. Pretty straightforward unbolting these cars. They're basically just like a big Meccano set, so yeah, everything's sort of laid out and pretty easy to get places apart from 1 or 2 bolts, but it's all fun and games. There's nothing really too difficult pulling these cars apart. So this driver's side guard I'd actually prepped up for another project, but I didn't end up using it for that one. So yeah, I basically just cleaned up the bare metal areas with the dioxidine and then prepped it up as you see it here. So 80 grit over the bare metal and then yeah, a bit of 120, 180 over the pre-existing epoxy. And this is the passenger side guard. So this one needed a full dioxidine on the outside, prepped it up with the 80 grit, and yeah, 120, 180 on the inside of the panel. So yeah, now that's ready for another coat of epoxy. On with the driver's side doors. So that's the back door there. The inside of this door, I'd actually done a few repairs to it. Now I've sealed that back off with another coat of epoxy. I did that before I prepped up the driver's side back door, so that one just there. Driver's side front door, that's sitting in dioxidine at that stage, so I hadn't fully prepped that one up for epoxy. Now this radiator support panel I did have blasted, so it didn't need a whole lot of work. Basically just went over it with some 120, cleaned up any areas that I'd done any small bits of welding on, those transcooler mount brackets, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's a really good radiator support panel, that one. There's those panels all finished off, waiting to go into storage. I've prepped up the inside of this bonnet, got another coat of epoxy primer on that. Now I'm getting stuck into the outside of the bonnet. So the bare metal, same again, clean it off with the dioxidine, wrap it up with 80 grit, and then 120, 180 over the whole bonnet. Now this is a new product that they've put me on recently, the Resto Finished Metal Cleaner. I'm sure I'll be using that a lot more in the future as well, because I'm really impressed with it so far. So now the bonnet's all nice and prepped up, it's ready for a few more coats of epoxy primer, seal off all that bare metal and the sanded epoxy primer, getting it all ready for filler work later on. So now I'm spraying a bit of epoxy primer over top of that bonnet. I think you kind of forget how big these bonnets are until you actually have to stand them up and spray them like that. But I do find this is probably the best ways to actually epoxy these panels or prime them, whatever you're doing with them. Unless yeah, they're bolted on the car and you can't do that. Alright, that's the bonnet all sealed off inside and out, and along with all the doors, the guards, nose cone, road support. The only thing I haven't done at the moment is the boot lid. Running low on a few things, consumables, sand discs, that kind of thing.
I'm kind of thinking if the boot lid is going to be anything like the bonnet, it's going to be absolutely stuffed everywhere it's soda blasted. Not quite sure what that guy was thinking. There was fucking rust all through here, but you get that. It's just what happens, I suppose. Tripping over the hose, but happy with all how this is coming about. Doors come up really nice, guards are looking good. All this stuff's now ready to be put into storage. I'm gonna have to bring the boot lid in, obviously, get that one sorted out when I can, and then it'll be time to start getting some epoxy on the shell.
So this boot lid, I did actually have this blasted and epoxy primed, but I don't know if the person just didn't put any hardener in it or enough hardener. So I ended up having to basically get rid of all of that epoxy primer, and to my surprise, I found a whole lot of rust under it as well. So they didn't do a very good blasting job. So I wasn't really too happy with that, and yeah, it took me quite a while to clean all of that up. But I suppose that just sort of goes along with the restoration sort of business. You sort of, if you don't do it yourself, yeah, sometimes it just doesn't get done right at all, which is very annoying, but it sort of just goes with the territory sometimes. But as you can see, I got it all nice and cleaned up. So yeah, it's pretty happy with the overall finish of this one now that I've sort of done it myself. Now back onto the shell. So the cow panel just needed a few little touch-ups with the dioxidine. I ended up cleaning up inside that plenum. Sort of just did my best as I could in there. Didn't get too overly carried away, but I did want to seal it off with something nice and make it look all nice and pretty in there. So now I'm just prepping up that dog leg inside the door jamb a little bit and the sill panel. That is a brand new sill panel I welded on, so didn't need a whole lot of prep. Not getting too overly concerned with the masking either, because yeah, basically just running low air pressure and everything just gets sucked out through the filters. Same needed on the driver's side as well. So a few areas that I'd etch primed where I'd sort of reworked after I'd prepped up the door jambs the first time around. But yeah, as you can see, right there, all nice and prepped up in epoxy primer, everything's stripped back, same as the other side, and a nice fresh coat of epoxy primer on it. So this is one of those jobs that I really wasn't looking forward to, stripping off all that old acrylic off the beaver panel, but thankfully it cleaned up really nice, and I was really happy with the end result there. Yeah, that's basically finished off with 40 grit on the DA, 80 grit on the DA. I did go over it with 40 grit because I'd used a roll lock to basically rip off all that old paint. And then I used the 40 grit on the DA to sort of lessen those scratches, and then 80 grit to sort of blend it all in. Now the roof on this car had a lot of surface rust on it. Not from sitting in bare metal or anything, but just from over the years, patina as the cool kids would call it. So after a few coats of dioxidine, I ended up stepping it up and basically digging out all those old pits, all those rust pits with a 1/8 drill bit. So yeah, mechanically stripped them out and then gone over it with the cleaner strip wheel, wire wheel, and then yeah, followed through with the dioxidine. So the footage you see here is actually before I dioxidined it, so it did clean up pretty nice. There's still a few little spots that I needed to wash out with the dioxidine. But as you can see, those little sort of scratch marks from the little 1/8 drill bit. And yeah, now that's ready for a bit of epoxy primer. So a little bit of a mask up, prep it all up with the 80 grit. And yeah, clean it down with the Resto finish metal prep and get a few more coats of epoxy primer on it. I was actually really impressed by how straight this roof actually was for a 50-year-old car. Had a few little dents in it, a few little ripples, that sort of thing, but overall straightness, I was really impressed. And of course, because it was getting late in the day, I ended up having a little bit of a bug, decided to dive bomb and go for a little bit of a run, but that's no big drama. We can sand him out and put another coat of epoxy primer on it. Now that's that rear quarter getting all sealed up. Decided I'd do something a little bit different, sort of one hand on the camera, one hand on the spray gun, give that sort of a little bit of a try out. I think the footage actually turned out pretty nice for this one. Yeah, I was pretty happy with it. I ended up posting something on one of the restoration groups on Facebook, and yeah, people were calling me a bit of an amateur, that sort of thing, with another little bit of footage that I did on the driver's side quarter panel. So yeah, that was a bit funny, but yeah, I don't think people realise how hard it is to hold one thing and spray, you know, pretty consistently with the other hand. But I suppose there's a few know-it-alls on those sort of groups, but take it for what it is. Yeah, I really don't care. It doesn't really bother me a whole lot. At the end of the day, I'm happy with the work that I do. So yeah, as long as I'm doing it, I have some pretty good faith in what I'm doing's going to last. So yeah. Now anyway, enough rambling. That's the driver's side quarter all prepped up. Again, cleaned with that Resto finish metal cleaner stuff. And yeah, that one come up looking pretty nice as well. I was really happy with that. Now another little job that I had to do on this car was I actually had to swap out the body mount rubbers, because the ones that I got from Resto Country or whatever it was, they'd actually all cracked out. So I swapped them out for some Super Pro ones. They were the other ones that people sort of recommended. So yeah, hopefully they actually last, because the other ones basically, the car sat in the shed for 12 months and that all cracked and yeah, turned to shit. So it's very annoying, but yeah, you get that. But now, yeah. Panel's all back on the car, it's all ready for filler work, that sort of thing. Really happy with how this one's gone together. There is a few little things that I need to strip back and epoxy prime, but I'm going to do that sort of after that first round of filler work is done. But yeah, really happy with it so far. All my hours gapping up this car, getting the panel-to-panel fitment, you know, as good as it is, it's really paid off, I think. Yeah, I'm really happy with the fit and finish of this car. It's definitely one of the better ones that I've done. Yeah, just to be able to look down the side of this car and not see any big, you know, dives or anything in the panels like what you can normally get in some of these cars, because at the end of the day, they were never really built all that well. So yeah, to get one to this standard, it does take quite a long time. Alright, so we're on the stands, we've got the car lifted up, it's now ready for bodywork. And this will be the next stage of the body restoration of this one. So all my gap work's been done. Pretty happy with everything. Nothing's really jumping out at me that's, you know, really scary looking at the moment. It's gapped up pretty well for a 50-year-old car. But anyway, that one's gonna have to wait, because that's the end of this video. And in the next one, you'll see this one going through the process of getting body worked, panel to panel blocked, and yeah, getting stuck into primer, ready for paint.